Hi everybody, this is your optional final exam review video. So, of course, if you wanted just to get a little bit more information about what I would be looking for with these questions or some works that might fit, things of that nature, I'm going to cover that. And if you want to go back to it again and again, of course, please feel free. Also, keep in mind that if there's something that you feel like is not fully addressed here, just send me an email, send me a text, give me a call. I'll be glad to clarify anything or answer some follow-up questions that you have. I also want to note, of course, remember that the final exam, you're going to have 24 hours to do. There will be 6 questions on it. And for those of you who have the 3 or fewer absences and the 89.5 or above average, you'll get to answer half of those, so 3 of the questions. And I'll make sure before the exam hits that you know if you're in that group. So we're going to go ahead and go through the questions. Pardon me if I scroll a little bit back and forth or kind of up and down the sheet because I want to be able to reference specific works. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about these questions and go one by one here. So there are potential exam questions here 1 through 10. This is also posted under week 13 in Canvas, so you can reference this sheet a few times over. I want to go ahead and just jump right in. We'll start with number 1. Literature about work is often closely tied to cultural anxieties of the time period. So discuss how 2 different works from our class give insight into particular cultural anxieties. Please note that this is 2 works from any time period. They don't have to be from 2 different time periods, so anything. I would say there's some I find a little bit easier than others as far as giving insight into the anxieties of the time period. I would definitely say that Under the Lion's Paw is one. This worry that the farmland is not going to produce. I would definitely say that the Angel Island poems, giving insight into this anxiety that you can be working really hard and trying to make a better life for yourself, and it's still not enough to give you freedom. I would also say that The New Slavery in the South gives insight into this anxiety that you can never escape feeling owned by someone. So those would be examples just in the Gilded Era alone. I'd say any of the Triangle Memorial speech, Sisters in the Flames, Rituals of Spring, anything to do with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory are definitely anxieties about workplace safety. The Adding Machine gives insight into workers feeling disposable. You could talk about Harlan working under the gun as feeling like your bosses, the justice system, everybody's against you. Waiting for Lefty, there's anxieties about supervisors never paying you enough so that you can live and using corrupt practices. I mean, it just sort of goes on and on. Point of No Return, anxieties about how people might be returning from the war and not able to cope. Something happened, these anxieties about always I could be getting fired or my boss might not like my performance. In the 80s to 2000s, I would say Microserfs is going to give insight into the anxieties of, work life overtaking everything. American Pastoral, anxieties about, the next generation departing from the earlier generation. And definitely Enron has some anxieties about people getting left behind when change comes, and change coming sometimes in corrupt forms. So really, you could pick any 2 different works. Again, some of these are better than others. You'll notice I never mentioned The Biography of a Bootblack. I didn't mention The Financier. I didn't mention Babbitt. Those ones maybe don't have as much about this is an anxious time as some of the other ones are. But if you can find some connection there, great. So with number 1, what I'd be looking for is this. That you say, first off, work number 1 discusses this set of anxieties from this time period. This is what was going on in this time period, and this is how the plot or the events or the characterization of this piece ties into that. And then go into the same thing from work number 2. Make sure it's clear what was going on in the time period compared to what is being expressed in the work. So cultural anxieties, think of those as fears of what could go wrong, fears of what the worst case scenario is. And a lot of our works are filled with anxiety, so you can pull from so many of those. Okay? And remember, your question response length should be 5 to 7 sentences. With number 2, throughout the class, we've addressed a variety of work settings, including factories, farms, banks, and corporations. Select 2 works that focus on 2 different kinds of work settings. What do these settings have in common, and why are these common links important? So with this question, you do not have to, again, deal with 2 different time periods. You could be working with the same time period. You can do really whatever you like, and we have so many different kinds of work settings. If we look at the financier, we have basically an office, a finance house. Under Lyons Paw is a farm. The biography of Boot Black, I think we have sort of like the streets to business. That might be a little difficult one to talk about. New Slavery in the South, we have a plantation. Of course, all the Triangle factory works. We have a factory. With Babbitt, we have a real estate office. Adding Machine, we have an office, and so on and so on. Just be able to determine what these settings are and pick 2 works that focus on 2 different kinds of settings. So when you think about what these settings have in common, do these settings treat workers in the same way? Do these settings inhibit workers' rights? Do these settings have safety issues? What exactly do these settings have in common? And why is it important to think about that? Why do we need to understand that sometimes a factory and a farm have some of the similar things going on? Or why is it important that a corporate office of the current era might have something in common with a bank in the 1950s? So I will say I'm going to be a little loose with the work settings nature. So let's say one of the settings is an ad agency and one of them is a bank. I would consider that 2 different work settings. So they don't have to be grossly different like a farm and Microsoft. They don't have to be like that. They can definitely be 2 more closely related types. But you could come up with some very interesting things if you compare a farm to Microsoft. With both of those, definitely there is a constant lack of work-life balance based on our readings. So we've talked about 1 and 2. Let's move to 3. Our class readings have covered a variety of supervisory styles in each work. So in this one, do select 2 works from 2 different time periods. And I've charted out, of course, your works that belong to different time periods above, and discuss the approaches of the supervisors in each. What impact do these styles have on the supervisor's subordinates? So really, you can do any one where you feel like a supervisor or owner's presence is there. So, for example, we do see supervisors in the financier. We see owners in Under the Lyons Paw and the New Slavery in the South. In the Triangle things, technically there's supervisors there, but they're not present, so those might be a little difficult. But we definitely see a supervisor in the Adding Machine. In the 1930s section, we hear about some of the supervisors, and we also definitely hear about them in I Am a Woman Worker and in Waiting for Lefty. The 1940s to 1970s, 1980s to 2000s, in the current era, we do get a pretty strong sense of our supervisors in most all of these works. I would say the ones that are a little bit less apparent would be under 1940s to 1970s. I would probably avoid Sometimes a Great Notion. Under 1980s to 2000, Rabbit is Rich is maybe not the strongest one there to work with, but in the current era, I think you could talk about either one of those. Okay? So be able to pick 2 works from 2 different time periods and just be able to discuss what exactly those supervisors do. How do they treat their employees? What philosophies do they embrace? And then as a result, what is the impact on these employees? So how does each supervisor in these 2 works have some kind of effect on the workers there? For number 4, We have, in many of our works, characters' working lives heavily influence their personal lives, both positively and negatively. So address how two of our readings from two different time periods discuss the connection between working life and personal life. There's a ton of our readings that do this. I'm going to go through and talk about those briefly. But I will say with this question, make sure that you are able to clearly discuss, pick your two different readings from two different time periods, and discuss what happens to this person's personal life as a result of their working life. Or is it hard to really pull the two apart? Is their working life and their personal life kind of one and the same? And how do we see that? So be as specific as possible with how you're discussing the blend or the distance between working life and personal life. So I would say, going back with that question, I think that you could definitely address the financier. If you're thinking about Cowperwood's family and his father, his mother, how the work and the personal life had this kind of social aspect. Definitely Under the Lion's Paw. If you think about, it's hard to probably have a really enjoyable time with your family when you're stressed about your work making no money. I think that probably Angel Island poems maybe in a sense, but I think that you see a lot more of the personal life and the working life there. So under the Gilded Era, I'd probably be more inclined toward either the Financier or Under the Lion's Paw. With 1900, 1929, Sisters in the Flames or Rituals of Spring both talk about the effect on the personal life or the dreams of these ladies in the factory. I think definitely Babbitt you could talk about, because there's a huge family discussion at the beginning of the work, and then there's a work discussion, and some of these things kind of blend into each other. Definitely The Adding Machine. I think that the way Zero acts is often a result of not only his terrible personality, but also his working life. I think Harlan would work for this. I Want You Women Up North to Know would work. I Am a Woman Worker as well, and Waiting for Lefty. Any of those have components where the people there talk about the working life versus personal life, and what happens in that balance between the two. I think definitely in the 1940s to 1970s, you could talk about Point of No Return. I think probably that would be it for that period. Something happened, we don't get enough to see what's going on in this person's personal life, quite frankly. In the 1980s to 2000, I'd probably go with Microserfs as our main one that talks about personal versus working life. And then in the current era, I think that one, maybe then we came to the end, but we see so much of what that office is like, we have to infer a lot about personal life. So that one might be a little bit of a tough one. Okay? So just kind of going through, these are my thoughts with what might work, what might not. If there's something I haven't named or something I said might be tough, but you're still interested in working with it and you have a question, just let me know. Let's go to number 5. Although our course readings have included many characters as complicated as real people, they also have included characters who are heavily symbolic. Analyze 2 different characters from 2 different works in 2 different time periods. What kinds of workers are these characters and what do they represent? We have some great symbolic characters, I would say. In The Financier, a lot of the minor figures. Under the Lion's Paw, I think we don't get enough of a lot of these characters to see them beyond their symbolism. Definitely the Man with the Hoe, the man being our symbol. Boot Black would be a great symbol, the main man there. I'll take a New Slavery in the South with the peon. I think of his owner, the senator, as probably a really great symbolic character. And actually the speaker in Angel Island, too. So I think you could make a case for most everything in the Gilded Era. You could talk about a symbolic character. In 1900 and 1929, the Adding Machine stands out to me the most. Zero and his friends are all very symbolic. His wife is a heavy symbol. I mean, these are not very well developed characters for particular purposes. I would say, too, with Babbitt, you might be able to pull some things from him as well. And we don't get a lot of these individual ladies in the triangle works, so those could potentially work. But in 1900, 1929, my go-to would be the Adding Machine, if you pick that era. In the 1930s, Waiting for Lefty all day is the place to go. These characters are meant to be types, very clear-cut types. I would work with that piece if you're going to work in that era. The 1940s to 1970s, I think that I would probably go with Sometimes a Great Notion, because we have these figures at the beginning of the chapter who are all worried about various economic things. Later on in the piece, we have the bar owner. So we don't have these very well sketched out people. Maybe even you could potentially work with Something Happened. There's a lot of minor characters that get talked about there. With the 1980s to 2000s, I would say Microsurfs is great to talk about symbolic characters. And then for the current era, Enron and Then We Came to the End both have some great symbolic characters. So again, a lot of our works, and just be able to talk about what types are they. You know, is this the one who kisses up to the boss? Is this the go-getter? Is this the beaten down worker? Like, who are they? What do they represent? And how do you know? Be able to explain that fully. So remember, with number 5, 2 characters, 2 different works, 2 different time periods. With number 6, this is all about resistance. So resistance to perceived oppression in the workplace can take passive, subtle forms and active forms. So passive and subtle forms would be mumbling comments, could be organizing people together to ultimately do a protest, those kinds of things. Could be just, you know, doing little things to sabotage. Active forms would be very much more in your face, recognizable. So the question is, how is resistance portrayed in 2 of our works from 2 different time periods? Does one type appear to be more effective than another? We see resistance in many ways. 8 Hours is very blatant resistance. I would say definitely, you could say the financier has some kinds of resistance as far as not necessarily oppression, but Frank Capra would feel like his talents might be not recognized as much as they should. But I would say out of the Gilded Era, 8 Hours would be my main go-to. Under the 1900s, 1929, the only one that really is where someone feels oppressed and acts out in some way would be the Adding Machine, because unfortunately in the Triangle works, they couldn't really do much of anything, and in Babbitt, he's got it pretty good. He's not acting out. In the 1930s, we have Harlan. We also have Waiting for Lefty. Those are both works that talk about resisting against forms of oppression. I would say in the 1940s, 1970s, I'm thinking that Something Happened. When there's that conversation about who's afraid of who, you may be able to pull something out about resistance. In the 1980s to 2000s, I'm just not seeing a whole lot in terms of resistance there. That might be an interesting commentary on where our society moved to. But in the current era, Then We Came to the End would definitely include resistance strategies. So you have a lot of options. Just make sure that they're from 2 different time periods. So I'll leave it up to you with whichever you would like to talk about, and then what kind of resistance, if any, appears to be more effective than another when you're looking at how resistance looks in these 2 works. Number 7, we've got focused on purpose of work. So characters in our literature work for a variety of purposes. For status, because they love the work, their work reflects their talent, to support a family, or just to survive. And so how are these purposes portrayed in 2 works from 2 different time periods? You literally could talk about most any work here, I think. Many of them from the first 2 periods are going to be about survival. with the exception of like the financier. I think there's something for status there. And I would say with Boot Black, it starts off maybe as survival, but then it's also kind of to feel this dream of becoming someone. I think that to survive would cover a lot of the triangle pieces. The adding machine, that's a tough one. I would still want to tackle that because I would love to know why you think zero works. I think Babbitt, again, so he can buy some things to have some status. I think that in the 1930s pieces, probably again for survival is a main motivator with a lot of these, except for the doctor one in Waiting for Lefty, which seems more about generally an attempt to help people. With the 1940s to 1970s, I would think that you could do a lot with Point of No Return. I think Charles Gray, we could talk about why he works. Something happened. I would love to hear your guess on that. And then sometimes a great notion, really, except for the bartender, we don't get a lot of reasons about why the folks in this town work in a particular way. You could do a lot in the 1980s, 2000s with Rabbit is Rich, and definitely a lot with American Pastoral. And we get clear-cut motivations for why these people are working and why they work in the way that they do. Microsurfs may be a little bit more subtle, and then I think with Enron, we get definitely a sense of why some of the people work for that particular company. So we've got a lot of different things you could potentially do there. With number 8, literature about work has become increasingly more about corporations than about skilled labor. Despite this shift, it can be argued that many American business philosophies have remained the same. So discuss how a work focusing on skilled labor and a work focusing on the corporate world are connected by similar business philosophies. So skilled labor, of course, is going to be anything that's hands-on. Farming, factory work, for example. So skilled labor would be in 8 hours. Under the Lion's Paw, The Man with the Hoe, Boot Black, New Slavery in the South, all the triangle pieces, Harlan, I Want You Women to Know, I Am a Woman Worker. And then in the 1940s, 1970s, we definitely see a shift, with the exception of sometimes A Great Notion, which is a logging town portrayal. Everything else is really more corporately minded. So I would say if you're going to pick a skilled labor piece, I'd probably work with something before the 1940s, 1970s. And if you're going to work with something that's a corporate piece, I'd work with something like 1940s to 1970s and after, and be able to talk about what connected business philosophies they have. Like, in one of the pieces, do you see that what links a skilled worker or a skilled work environment with a corporation, that there's still this sense that workers' full sense of fulfillment does not matter, or that money is more important than anything else, such as safety considerations. So what exactly are the philosophies that seem to connect this work in a skilled labor environment and this work in a corporate environment? And then with number 9, a person's idea of success is often tied to his or her work. How do we see success at work defined in 2 different pieces of literature in 2 different time periods? For some of these folks, we see they're working to survive. I don't think that they care the least bit about what definition of success is, but I think we do see definitions of success in the financier in the Gilded Era. I think we see that in Babbitt. We also could see some of that in Waiting for Lefty, particularly in the doctor area. In the 1940s, 1970s, I would say any one of those, same with 80s to 2000s, and same with the current era. How do they seem to measure success? And make sure you do pick 2 different time periods. How is success represented in one and then in the other? Now finally we get to number 10. The flashback is a common strategy in our literature, especially more current literature, where a narrator or character might reflect on a past job or an impactful work experience. So, broadly speaking, a flashback should look back at the past, some way or form. So, in two different pieces, does not have to be different time periods. What functions do the flashbacks serve? So, when you're answering this question, be able to discuss what these flashbacks are and why we see them, what's important about them. So, just to look back at some of these, as far as flashbacks are concerned, the Gilded Era, it's not a big thing with them. Nor is it really with the 1900, 1929 works or the 1930s. We get our flashbacks really 1940s to current. So we do see flashbacks in Point of No Return. We definitely see flashbacks in Something Happened. I would say it's a little bit more subtle and sometimes a Great Notion, but there's some things there. But Point of No Return, Charles Gray is constantly going to flashbacks of his previous working life. Something Happened, the narrator is always looking back on what his previous work experience was. In the 1980s, 2000s, Rabbit is Rich doesn't really have, I think, that much in terms of the flashback, except for some hints here of Rabbit looking back at being a high school basketball star. And there is a little bit about the marital troubles that he had. There's a little something there, but not a lot. Microsurfs, we do get flashbacks about the past of the narrator, particularly his brother's passing. We also, with American Pastoral, we get flashbacks to when Swede's father is retiring, what his working life used to look like. So if you were talking about flashbacks in the 80s, 2000s, Microsurfs and American Pastoral probably have the most clear-cut ones. American Pastoral, to me, is the strongest one, though. The flashbacks to the father and the flashbacks to the daughter visiting the factory with the magic hands. Okay? So I would say so far, flashbacks are really the strongest in, to my opinion, Point of No Return, Something Happened, American Pastoral, and then with the current era, then we came to the end. Flashes back on a lot of different work scenes, and I think that one would be a strong contender as well. So, looking through these questions, you've got 10 possibilities. 6 will be on the exam, and I've gone through and talked about the works that I think would fit pretty well there, the works that would maybe be the best fit, some of the things you might say. So just keep in mind the length, keep in mind that the grading is going to be the same as for the midterm. People did a great job on the midterm, so I feel like if you can keep that momentum going, you should be just fine with this. But if you're looking through this, if you're looking at this video and you still have some questions, of course, get in touch. There's still plenty of time. We're just starting week 14. We still have week 15, and then the 16th week is when the exam is. So keep in touch with anything that you need, and we will talk soon.